Hello and welcome to Handed Down, where we celebrate traditional songs and the people who sing them. Now today I'm joined by a Northumbrian piper, melodeon player, singer and experienced songwriter. He's especially well known in the Cambridge folk scene and in the Northumbrian piping community. But with his various bands over the years, he'll be familiar to many. Andrew Byrne, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Andrew, where are you joining us from today?
Well, from Cambridge, where I live and where most of my band live.
And is there a lot going on this summer in Cambridge in the folk scene?
Well, the Folk Festival, of course, where we run a workshop in Northumbrian piping, but lots of other festivals as well. We played at the Ely Festival as well earlier in the summer.
Brilliant. And I think we're just going to get straight into your song today because you've brought a song along and it's a song that I know is a bit of a school song, actually. I learned it at school from a book and I think a lot of people did. But it's also quite an old folk song.
Well, I mean, of course, I learnt it in the same way that you did. And I think all the people of my generation did. And we always try this out with audiences and we find that they learnt it at primary school as well, or in cubs or brownies or around the campfire. And it became that kind of a song, which was exactly the problem we were trying to address, really. It got kind of toned down. It was sanitised. It was actually bowdlerised by Sabine Baring-Gould, and to some extent by Cecil Sharp, who sort of toned it down a little bit after he collected it. So we wanted to try and get back to the original sense of it as a rather dark song of sexual pursuit.
Yes, because I was looking earlier today at the original words, and they are quite suggestive, aren't they? And they're a little bit predatory, maybe.
No, they really are, yes. It looks as if the oldest version of it was a black letter ballad from the 17th century, which exists at the Bodleian now. I've just downloaded the image of the text a while ago, which is a very long version, but as you say, extremely suggestive, although I suppose mild by today's standards. But I'm also relying, I mean, I came across it, actually, the reason why we did it is that a while ago, I attended a book launch at Cecil Sharp House for the new Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, which was edited by Steve Roud and Julia Bishop, who I know a little bit from doing research projects on children's traditional playground games with them. Yeah. And I got the book, which they kindly autographed for me, and brought it home and started ransacking it for new material for the band. And I just came across the Keeper, and I thought, I'll just skip this, we don't want to do the Keeper, not that old thing. And then had a look at it and had a look at the notes and began to realise that there was rather more to it than I'd assumed. So I looked at their version of it, which is it's a kind of combination of two versions that Cecil Sharp collected, actually. So I started looking at some of those versions as well, and found, this rather interesting fact that he had slightly changed the version he collected to include it in the first publication. So, we started to look at that sort of censorship and see what we could do to redress that in the performance version.
So what's going on in the uncensored version then? There's a lot of chasing lots of does, isn't there?
There's lots of chasing the does, yeah, and I think we've all worked out that the does are really women. I mean, it's all kind of slightly, slightly sort of difficult, this, because it is a song of sexual pursuit and it does represent the male characters, the keepers, as having all of the power, really, and the poor doe is kind of fleeing before them. But the line that he changed is interesting. I've depended a little bit for this on a post by Malcolm Douglas, who, the late Malcolm Douglas, who did edit the original Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, who's got a really nice entry on it on the Mudcat website, which gives the whole history. And he goes to the trouble of printing out Cecil Sharp's edited version of the one that he collected from Robert Kinchin in 1909. And the interesting verse is let's have a look, it's the second verse actually, where he says, the first doe he shot at he missed, the second doe he trimmed he kissed. I mean, already it's beginning to be obviously more than hunting. And then the third line is, the third doe went where nobody wist. That seems to be the edited line, because the original one, which Malcolm Douglas then prints out, is the third ran away in a young man's breast, which takes you a little bit more deeply into the the kind of sexual content. So we've restored that line, although actually it's not in Steve and Julia's version. No. So we've had to sort of go around the houses. So the version we've got is basically the one in Steve and Julia's book, but with that line restored. And then we've made another cheeky change of our own, which we like to challenge audiences to try and spot. And we offer them a free CD if they can spot it.
Oh, so you probably don't want to give that away then today?
No, I don't mind, actually. That'll be all right. I mean, I think, people who listen to this programme deserve to hear that. So it's in the last verse. In the Cecil Sharp version, it's the sixth doe. For us, it's the fifth one. So it will be the fifth doe ran across the plain. The keeper fetched her back again. And the lines we've put in are, but she slipped his bow and she caused him pain. They're among the leaves of green. So we've stuck in a bit to restore some agency to the poor doe.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I know.
I've always quite liked the Derry Derry Downs. You've got, and it's not in all the versions, is it? And the Jackie Boy Master isn't in all the versions, but I think you've got that in your version, haven't you?
We've got that, yeah. There seems to be a version of that. It's not in the original 17th century version, but it is, I think, in an 18th or 19th century version, maybe. And that, of course, is what everybody loves and what we remember singing at school. And when we launch into that sort of antiphonal chorus in folk clubs, it gets a really good response. You can see people reaching back nostalgically to their primary school years and their time in the Cubs and Brownies.
Absolutely, and everyone can join in as well, which is great, isn't it?
Yeah. We haven't tried dividing the audience into male and female for the various bits of the response, but we could try that, I guess.
Oh, that would be fun, especially if it got competitive.
Oh, yes, we like a bit of competition in our chorus singing.
Excellent. Is there anything else you know about the song that you want to talk about?
Well, I don't know much about the tune, and Steve, I mean, although Julia is a musicologist and her musical notes on the songs are quite extensive, but there isn't much in here about the music, I think. And the music was first notated, obviously, a lot later than the words, so I don't really know where that's come from. But it's pretty consistent. It seems to be much the same tune everywhere. But the tweak we've made is to put the final verse into a minor key to kind of indicate the darkness, so that works quite well as well. And we slow down the last chorus as well, a little bit like a Morris jig, sort of slowing down and then speeding up again.
Is that the actual book? I can hear you opening.
You can hear me rustling the pages of my prized copy of Julia and Steve's book. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, it was lovely to get it from them because, as I said, I've worked with them in the past on children's traditional games in a couple of research projects. Actually, a really nice thing was the first time we performed this song was at the St Neots Folk Club in Cambridgeshire. Yeah. And then the second time was at the St Neots Folk Festival a year ago, I think. And then the third time was at the Ely Folk Club. So we went to the Ely Folk Club last year in the autumn, and we thought we're going to do this song, and we had our set lined up. And I was looking around the room to see if I could spot anyone who I knew in the audience, which is typically the case when we play locally. And I suddenly saw in the audience there was Steve Roud. Extraordinary. And so I went up to him. I said, "Hello, Steve." He said, "Hello, Andrew." And I said, "Well, it's nice to see you here because we're going to do one of the songs from your book, from the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs." And he said, "Oh, which one?" So I told him it was the keeper, and he said he'd be interested to hear that. So he was quite polite about it afterwards. I don't know what he thought. But I saw him sort of madly texting while we were starting the set, and I checked out and he was texting Julia, of course, who was in Sheffield, and saying, "You'll never guess who I'm listening to in the Ely Folk Club." And she sent a text back saying, "Are there Northumbrian small pipes?" And he sent one back saying, "Yes." So that was really nice to be able to play the song from the book and have Steve in the audience. And I also said to him, do you go to folk clubs often, Steve? And he said it's the first one I've been to for 32 years.
Oh, my word. So you were absolutely honoured. Now, I think the question everyone wants to know the answer to is, did he join in the chorus?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. I did not spot that. I should have had my wits about me.
Oh, well, if anyone listening was there, maybe they can let us know. So the other thing that we always talk about, of course, on the podcast is people's journey into folk music. So I'm going to ask you that, Andrew. Where did it all start for you?
Well, I mean, pretty early, really. I can remember my parents singing folk songs of one kind or other. They weren't performers. They didn't go to folk clubs or anything like that. I mean, but just singing around the house. I think my mum probably picked ones up from some of the American recordings, people like, the Weavers, Pete Seeger and so on, who did actually record a version of this song, in fact. And my dad came from Tyneside. He was the son of a river policeman on the Tyne. So I've always had a little bit of northeastern music feeding into my consciousness as well. And he left me his collection of Geordie songbooks, which is a much treasured archive. So I guess from there, and then at school started playing contemporary folk music, Dylan and Cohen and so on, and on the guitar, and then eventually more folk music influenced by people like Bert Jansch and Martin Carthy started copying their styles, really, and their songs, and trying to understand what their tunings were. I can remember standing next to Martin Carthy in the toilet of the Hitching Folk Club in the 1970s, asking him what the guitar tuning was for, I think it was the famous Flower of Serving Man or something like that. Yeah. So, that kind of thing, and then joining a band in the 70s when I first came to Cambridge, joined the band, and those are the guys I'm still playing with, actually. So we've been playing together for 40 years, really.
That original band, was that Cobbler's Last?
Yeah, it was Cobbler's Last, yeah. Which was a kind of song band and KB band, yeah.
When did you join Camus? Was that an offshoot of Cobbler's Last, or is that a separate band?
It was an offshoot, really. Greg left Cobbler's Last and started Camus in the early 80s, and David and I left. David's our, originally was our bass player, actually, but then keyboard player and now Northumbrian piper as well. So we left and joined Camus, and we've been playing together ever since, really.
And how did you get into playing the Northumbrian pipes?
Oh, it's an interesting story. I mean, I've been playing them for about 12 years, so not all that long. I've been playing the melodeon for more like 30, but the reason was that we had somebody in our Cayley band who makes Northumbrian small pipes, Mike Nelson, in his garage in Bar Hill outside Cambridge. And he's most famous for making Catherine Tickell's pipes. Yeah. He actually made her pipes, which people are surprised by. They assume it's one of the Northumbrian makers, but it was Mike, who's been making them since the 70s. He was a trained scientific instrument maker from a company on the Science Park in Cambridge. So he applied the science to the making of the pipes, and he's been making them ever since. So his pipes are highly prized, and so they've always been around in the band. And as I say, my family come from the northeast, so I'd always been intrigued by it. I don't know why I left it so long, really. I should have taken it up earlier, but anyway, I'm trying to compensate with enthusiasm,
Well, it is quite an unusual instrument to play, but it's got a beautiful sound.
Oh, it's a lovely instrument, yeah. It's a proper chamber instrument. I mean, it's a nightmare to tune, and it misbehaves terribly in hot weather at festivals where all the beeswax starts melting, but it's a lovely instrument, yeah.
Well, it's quite nice to have an instrument that's a bit of a character in its own right, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and, in the northeast, in that particular triangle between Alnwick, Morpeth and Rothbury, it's the homeland. It's obviously not so strange. But down here in Cambridge, it's pretty exotic. So whenever we always begin the sets with it, and people always kind of sit up and take note and all the rest of it. And as I said, we run a piping workshop at the Cambridge Folk Festival, really to introduce people to the instrument, because it's not the kind of thing you can walk into a music shop and pick up, like a guitar or a fiddle. So we do that, and there's always a range of people there, and when we say, have people seen it before, some people say yes, and we say, who have you seen it with? And it's always Catherine. So we introduce Mike, who's part of the group, and say, here's the guy who made her pipes, and that's a good way in, really.
Tell me about the songwriting, because you've written some songs, haven't you?
Yeah, I find it very hard to write songs, actually, so I haven't written a great many. I mean, I've written more tunes than songs, in fact, but I've written a few. I started off really writing tunes to go with words, to go with poems. So we've got one song about the First World War on one of our albums, which was taken from poems by women during the First World War from a book called Scars Upon My Heart. So I wrote tunes for those poems. And then a few years ago, I wrote a song about my granddad, who was my mum's dad, who was a steelworks foreman in Hartlepool. And that's a bit of a tragic story about the decline of heavy industry in the northeast, which I think everybody knows in this country. And that steelworks was closed in the 1970s. So I wrote a song which was kind of about the history of, inspired by the history of his life broadly, but was a kind of lament for the decline of that industry. And that will be on the forthcoming album that we're doing along with The Keeper.
Tell me a bit more about the album.
Well, the last one we did was quite a few years ago, actually. We did a sort of greatest hits compilation to put out as a digital EP recently called Time and Again, just to test out what the international digital streaming market was like. And I have to say, we don't get a lot of money from that. I mean,
no.
I think in the 2 years it's been out, we've made $12.34. So there you go. So the next one will be a traditional CD that we can sell at folk clubs. So it's a collection of our current repertoire, really, ones that we haven't recorded already, including The Keeper, including the song about my granddad, which is called Back on the Night Shift. And the album is going to be called Out on the Spree, which is a line from one of Brian's songs, who's our guitarist and bouzouki player, who also a fine songwriter. He wrote a rather nice song called The Roaring Boys, which is about a collection of eccentric individuals in the New England tavern sometime at the end of the 19th century, the Roaring Boys. And one of the lines in that is Out on the Spree. So we've adopted that for the title of the album.
Oh, fantastic. I feel like I need to know a bit more about the Roaring Boys now. Or you're going to keep that as a little teaser for people who might want to buy the album?
Why not? Or I could send it to you and you could play a few bits. That would be great.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I've just come down from Boston town. I am Liverpool bound. For one more night with the Roaring Boys, I'll lay my money down. There'll be sharps and poodle fakers all out on the spree. But tonight I'll drink with the Roaring Boys, and a roaring boy I'll be. And you'll never want for riches when you're in their company. For tonight you'll drink with the Roaring Boys, and a roaring boy you'll be. You'll never want for riches when you're in their company. For tonight you'll drink with the Roaring Boys, and a roaring boy you'll be.
So when is the album out? When can people get hold of that?
Well, we'll do it through Bandcamp, so we'll do a kind of pre-launch version with a couple of giveaway tracks at some point in the autumn, and then aim to launch the whole thing in the new year.
Are you doing any gigs over the next few months?
Yes, we've had a really good year, actually. In fact, I mean, it was interesting, the pandemic thing. Everybody's had this experience, haven't they? And can't help talking about it. I mean, we couldn't play for 2 years, basically, like everybody else. So the band was pretty well suspended, although the Northumbrian piping community carried on piping through Zoom, which was interesting. I mean, it was a real challenge, but we ended up working on a sort of version of that whereby, one person played the tune. And then you mute, everybody else mute, so you just hear the person who's playing the tune and yourself. So it was actually very good for people's performance skills because, everybody was listening to you, unlike in a session where you can start the tune and then nobody can really hear you, Yeah. So we did that, but the band was pretty well suspended. So when the pandemic finished, we were a bit anxious about whether we'd be able to get going again, but we did, and we've actually had more gigs than ever since then. So we played, as I said, a few festivals and all the local folk clubs around Cambridge. At Saffron Hall, which at Saffron Walden, which runs a foyer folk series, foyer folk and foyer jazz. We played there, which was great. So we've got some gigs coming up next year. The Cambridge Folk Club, which has yet to give us a date. St Neots Folk Club, I think, in January. We're playing at a village in Cambridgeshire, Western Colville, in a reading room there. And we're playing as part of a Cambridge Collective at the East Anglian Traditional Music Day in Stowmarket in September. So plenty to look forward to.
Very nice. And if people want to book you for their own folk clubs, how can they get in touch?
Well, through the website. So the website will it gives everything really. It gives the bios, gives sample tracks and all the rest of it. And it gives our contact details, phone and email as well.
Excellent. So I was wanting to ask you, when you were talking about online piping, did you make any sort of new connections? Quite a number of the people I talked to say, well, yeah, it was awful. We couldn't gig, we could do normal things, but actually we did some quite different things. We did some new collaborations. We formed new groups. Was there anything like that within the Northumbrian piping community?
Well, there was a bit, actually. I mean, it's a very kind of tight community, so everybody knows each other anyway. But normally, I mean, the regional sessions are all sort of very separate. So, there's no way we could ever go to the Long Framlington group in Northumberland or the Oxford group or whatever. But on Zoom, of course, everybody could go to everybody else's sessions. So two interesting things happened. I mean, one was that the regional group started to interpenetrate a little bit. So more people started going to the London sessions. We used to go physically to that, and it's just started up again on the at the Calthorpe Arms on the Gray's Inn Road every month. And then the Oxford and Cambridge sessions started visiting each other as well. And in fact, we had one joint Zoom session between the Oxford group and the Cambridge group, which was really nice. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that happened was, of course, we had international visitors, because there's a few players in America and New Zealand and Australia who can't, of course, ever join in. And they've been coming to the sessions as well. So that was a real boon. Also, I mean, we found 2020 was a rather strange year, because the competitions, there are piping competitions at the various festivals in Northumberland were not possible. So the Northumbrian Pipers Society, that normally holds its competitions in Morpeth at the Bagpipe Museum, the Chantry Museum, decided to hold them by video submission. So we all sent in our videos, and the general effect of that was they got a hugely expanded submission rate, because normally, not that many people turn up to the Chantry, and certainly the international people can't go. But this year they could all go, so the competition was pretty hot that year.
I can imagine. What countries are really into the Northumbrian pipes then? I'm quite curious.
It is mainly, it's mainly America and New Zealand and Australia, but there are some people in Scandinavia who play, because there's always a bit of an overlap between Scandinavian music and northeastern music.
I didn't know that. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, I suppose it's kind of, back to the Vikings, really. I mean, when you think 1,000 years ago, the whole of the east of England was ruled by Danes for several hundred years. So I guess it goes back to that. But just the proximity of it, there's quite a lot of interchange, I think. So, bands like Baltic Crossing, where Andy May's Northumbrian piping is, and Ian Stevenson, who plays guitar with him, is sort of mixed in with Scandinavian players. So there's a bit of overlap.
It's interesting, isn't it? In one of our recent episodes, I found out that there was a really big tradition of Irish music in Switzerland, which I never knew. So there's all kinds of funny little crossovers. But no, it's great to hear that the Northumbrian piping community on an international level is just really, vibrant. And I guess it gave the judges a real problem. With so many submissions, a big job of work to do.
It did, yeah. They had to wheel in Catherine Tickell, who doesn't normally judge those competitions these days, but she did on this occasion, yeah. So all hands to the pump. We've talked a lot about the Northumbrian influence, which is kind of me, but I should say that in the band, we have Brian Cleary, who was born in Dublin and is an Irish musician who has a lot of Irish relatives who play in that tradition as well, and he is a fine guitarist and bouzouki player and writes songs in the kind of traditional manner as well. So one of his songs, which is really nice that we do and will be on the album, is called Bright Groves. And it's a kind of historical song about an ancestor of his who went to fight in the American Civil War. And he discovered in researching this that what happened was that there were 2 Irish units in the American Civil War, one on each side. And which one you joined kind of depended on where you landed. So people just found themselves accidentally on one side or the other of the Civil War. And at one particularly, tragic moment at the Battle of Fredericksburg, I think, one of the Irish groups found themselves facing the other one on the other side and realised they'd come there and they were killing their compatriots. So that's a great song, very kind of heartrending. So we have that, and we also have a strong Shetland tradition as our fiddler, Greg, who is a absolutely fantastic fiddler. I mean, I would say that, but he is pretty extraordinary. He's classically trained, but he played Irish music a lot to begin with. When we played together in Cobbler's Last, we mostly played Irish music. And he then went off to Shetland to study Shetland fiddle music with the great Tom Anderson, who was the doyen of Shetland fiddle music and the mentor of Ali Bain and people like that, and he learned a lot about fiddle music, and he came back and started a Shetland fiddle course in Cambridge, which then morphed into what's now called the Burwell Bash, which is now run by his daughter, which is actually a sort of multi-instrument tuition thing. So Andy Cutting teaches melodeon and so on. They've got some fine musicians there. So we have a sort of Shetland influence as well, and we do some we're working on a new Shetland set for the album as well, which is exciting. So we've got kind of Irish, English, Northumbrian, Shetland influences.
So how do all these different traditions come together in your music? What makes Camus Camus?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because they all kind of end up sounding like us. Greg always says, I think we do honour the traditions and we capture some of their characteristics. But it ends up sounding like us, and I guess it's the arrangements, the way we manage the chords, the way we manage the accompaniments. And I think of bands like Boys at the Lock, actually, where, of course, you've got a combination of Irish music and Shetland music and English and Northumbrian music. And so I guess we're not alone in blending those traditions, but it seems to work okay for us, I hope.
Are there any parts of the tradition that you have a particular affinity for in your own, either in your own playing or something that you like to listen to?
I like all of those, although, I guess I'm more closely sort of wedded to the Northumbrian tradition. But we do write tunes as well. Greg writes tunes in the Northumbrian style, and we've got a slow air on the last album by him. And I write tunes as well, which are not in any particular tradition. I do write tunes for Northumbrian pipes, so I've managed to win a couple of those competitions at the open competitions in the Northumbrian Piping Society. But I write tunes which are slightly eccentric, really, and hard to fit into any tradition, but the band seem happy to play them anyway. How did you get into all this then?
It sounds like a great story to tell, but it's completely true. I woke up one morning at 4:00 and I just knew that I had to do a podcast about folk music. And so my first thought was, I can't possibly do that. I've got a full-time job. I've got teenage kids. I've got, too much to do. But I kind of talked myself into it over the next few weeks and started doing a podcast. I had to learn a lot of things about how to do a podcast. So that's how it came about. But yeah, it just felt like the podcast world needed more folk in it.
Yeah, well, it's great. And I think your emphasis on the handed down thing, the way these things transform over time is really interesting. These projects that we've done with Steve and Julia on children's playground games are a perfect example of that, because you ask the kids where they got them from. They say, well, I just made it up, or my sister just taught it to me. And you look at the way it's documented by people like the Opis and you realise it's like 100 years old. But it's exactly that kind kind of tradition, and the way they change and adapt and new influences come in. It's very similar to folk music.
Absolutely. Well, to be honest, I'd love to hear more about that, because I had a little delve into children's songs when I was doing Bessie Bell and Mary Gray.
Oh, yeah.
And just having a browse through, I could see things that me and my friends used to sing in the 70s in Hull, and we thought we'd made it up as well. So it'd be lovely to hear a bit more about that.
I bet I know what you were singing.
My mother said I never would.
My mother said I never should play with the gypsies in the wood.
That's right.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I first got interested when I was a teacher in Cambridge in the 80s, and I was bringing some kids back from a show in London, 11-year-old kids, and I could hear these 3 little girls in the seat behind me singing these songs and clapping, and I could not work out what this was. And I got them back into the classroom the next day and recorded it all, and then realised there was a whole tradition of recording this stuff by Iona and Peter Opie.
Yes, yeah.
And then I got a job in university, so I'm now actually a professor at UCL, in fact, in media. So I've done a couple of projects, as I say, with Steve and Julia on children's traditional games, and we've gone out and collected new ones and seen how it's changed since the Opies collected them, and written about that and recorded them. So it's been really interesting.
That's wonderful. Have you got any sort of links to your writing on that? It'd be good to put them in the show notes, but I'd just be really interested to go and read that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, we've got a few books. I mean, I'll send them. I'll put them in the links. Yeah, that we've done. I mean, Julia's the real expert on this. I mean, she knows a huge amount about it, and she's written about it, and she's, in fact, she's managed a new kind of online repository, a new website hosted at the Sheffield Institute for Digital Humanities, where she's collected all of the Opie resources. So in those 2 projects, we took all of Iona's recordings from the 1980s that were deposited at the British Library as kind of cassette tapes and digitised them, so you can hear Iona saying, tell me a little bit more about that game, sing me that song, and they sing the song. And they're the ones. I mean, when we went out 2 years ago and listened to kids in the playground, there were, I found kids singing much the same songs, really, but then very different ones as well. So it's that thing about continuity and change, really. Yes,
and I can imagine that there's songs coming in from different parts of the world as well, and sort of joining the tradition.
There are, yeah, although we found difficulty collecting those. I mean, particularly in London, because the playgrounds we recorded on, although there are, as you'd expect, lots of languages spoken, they all end up speaking English as the lingua franca, so we can't, we end up sort of bothering Bengali kids for Bengali games, and they get a bit shy and disappear. So, but there is a guy in London, Dan Jones, who has successfully collected songs in many of those community languages. There's an Australian academic as well who spent a lot of time in England and Scandinavia collecting songs by, Punjabi girls singing, performing clapping games with Bollywood songs in Hindi, that kind of thing,
that just sounds
fascinating.
Amazing. This is the perfect companion piece to The Keeper as well. So it's going to, I think, probably evoke that same sense of nostalgia in terms of what we learned at school.
It really is that, yeah. Whenever we sort of give these projects an airing, I mean, immediately people start, as you did with Hull, start sort of remembering how they used to sing them when they were at school.
We're coming to the end of the show now. Andrew Byrne, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been lovely to have you on. And thank you to you as well for listening. Please do subscribe to Handed Down on Apple, Google, anywhere that you get your podcasts. Do subscribe to us. And you can follow us on Twitter at Handed Down Pod. And we've also got a new Facebook page as well. If you like the show, do rate us and tell other people about us too. We'll be back soon with more songs, stories, interviews, and just general folkiness. But for now, here is Camus to play us out with The Keeper.
Okay, 3, 4.
A keeper did a hunting go, all among his bucks and doe, all for the shoot at the gallant doe. bumblebee so green. To my ho down down, hey, ho down, derry derry down. She's a bumblebee so green. The first stone he shot at he missed. The second doe he trimmed he missed. Well, the third ran away in a young man's breast. She's a bumblebee so green. Jackie boy must sing well, very well, hey, oh down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. To my hey down, down, to my ho down, down, hey down, ho down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. The fourth doe ran across the room. The keeper fetched her back with his hook. And over there now you must go and look. There among the leaves so green. Jackie boy must sing well, very well, hey, oh down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. Hey down, down, to my ho down, down, hey down, ho down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. The fifth doe ran across the lane. The keeper fetched her back again. But she slipped his bow and she caused him pain. She's among the leaves of green. Jackie boy must sing well, very well, hey, oh down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. Hey down, to the ho down, down, hey down, ho down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. To my ho down, down, hey down, ho down, very, very down. She's a bumblebee so green. Well, so it all came back to you, didn't it? You remember it.